right, so now we're going on into lesson 2 of our percentages. So lesson 1 we just did, and it was remembering what a percentage was that we're comparing out of 100 things. Like if I had 17%, I know that's 17 pieces out of 100 pieces, or 17 out of the whole. And then we talked about, well, changing that percent into a fraction, or changing that percent into a decimal, or changing decimals into percents and fractions into percents. Those type of things are going to be key to doing this, because this lesson is applying percentages in a relationship to whole numbers. And this is 2 different lessons really put together. So this one is probably going to be a little longer as far as the video goes. Now, I've given you some really short ones, less than 15 minutes for most of these review lessons. So bear with me if this one goes about 20, since we're actually doing 2 concepts shoved together. There's some key information that we have to understand in our heads before we get into being able to solve these. The first key point is that I cannot possibly use a percent in a math problem. Some of you remember that because when you had those on your review lessons over the last couple of chapters, you always remember, well, I can't use a percent. Some of you don't remember that. Well, I can't. It's kind of like the idea of, how do I divide fractions? Well, I can't divide fractions. It doesn't mean I put an X on the question and throw it away because it's impossible to do. It's not impossible to do, but it is impossible to divide fractions. So we know we change division to multiplication. We find the reciprocal of the second fraction by flipping it. And then I can do that. In the same way, I can't use a percent in a math problem, but if you put a whole bunch of X's and just say, nope, can't do these, you're going to get them all wrong. And they're each worth 2 points. Don't do that. I'm going to change my percentages into decimals and fractions. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, ahead of time, as I work through all these review problems, I don't do any as fractions. The reason being is there's more steps, and the more steps there are, there's more chances of you making a mistake. If I change my percent into a decimal, I have a numerator and a denominator of a whole number, and my whole number has to go over 1. And then I have to cross reduce, and then I have to multiply across, and then I may have to convert, and there's a lot more steps there than I need to do. All of mine I'm going to show you is changing it to a decimal. And then my decimal is just straightforward multiplication of a whole number with a decimal. A lot easier, a lot fewer steps, greater chance of you being successful on your assignment. The second key to this is remembering something that I told you the first week of school. Yes, that was 36 weeks ago, but I've probably repeated it at least once every week for the past 36 weeks. The word of in 90% of our math problems means to multiply. We do get into some tricky questions where they put of in a strange place to try to confuse us. I haven't done that, not on my review questions, not on my homework assignment. Of, in this case, means to multiply. So you can count on that. So we're going to do 6 review questions here before we move on to the second half of the lesson. Now, here's where some of my frustration begins this last couple weeks of school. As I'm grading your math papers, and about half of you turn them in early, we are missing work. We just have answers thrown down on papers. I haven't taught you one time this year that it's okay just to put an answer down on a paper, and some of you have fought me for 36 weeks. But the majority of you that turned them in early without showing any work haven't had that problem since week 1 of school. Please don't convert back to what you thought was going to be acceptable in Mr. Parker's math class. It is never acceptable to do a math problem without showing work. I have a math degree, guys. And every one of these, when I work out my answer keys, I'm showing work. I'm showing what I'm multiplying by or dividing by or adding by so that I know where my answer came from. There are times I make mistakes on my answer key and I can go back and look at my work and say, yep, that's where I messed up. If you don't show me work, the greatest assignment or greatest grade you're going to get on your assignment is a 50%, and that's just by your choice. So stop watching the video in fast forward speed. I am not Flash by any means, shape, or form, so I don't go super fast. And your comprehension is suffering when you're watching me in fast forward. So please watch at normal speed, follow along, engage your brain so you're truly listening to what I'm saying, and you'll see exactly what I expect to see on your work to show work for your first point, and then your answer is going to be your second point. Starting with the first one. Once again, we're going to change all of these percentages into decimals, and every one of these has a percent. So I would start out saying, I can't do this. I have to change my percent. Well, how do I change a percent into a decimal? Yesterday's video, I dropped the percent sign. So I just put a line through it. And then I move the decimal from right to left. Now, most of these don't have a decimal on them. So I just have to add it to the right of the whole number. And then I have to move it from right to left 2 times. And notice on this one, there's only 1 digit. Well, that's okay. I'm just going to add a 0. That way I know that my decimal is in the right place. My second part of showing my work then is showing what math problem I'm doing. Of means to multiply. So I'm going to take my number and I'm going to multiply it by what my decimal is for my percentage. I get 90 times 0.08. When I have those 2 things on my paper, I have my point for showing my work. It's not difficult. Don't be lazy on me. You'll have plenty of time to do this assignment in class. Show your work so you get your point. No reason to miss these little points. Once I'm here, then I can pick up my handy dandy calculator and I can type in the math. Without work, I have to assume that you cheated. It may not be true, but I have no other assumption if I can't see where your answer came from. 90 times 0.08 or 90 times 8 hundredths, when I type it in, gives me 7.2, 7 and 2 tenths. Notice, less than 100%, my whole number compared to my answer is less than the whole number. That's key when checking to make sure my answer is logical. If I end up with 720, then that means I didn't multiply by a decimal point. It's a larger answer when my percent is less than 100%, can't be logical. So I would have to check where my decimal is and make sure that I have the right answer. On question 2, once again, I have a percent. I'm going to change it into a decimal. I drop my percent sign. I move my decimal from right to left 2 times. That gives me 0.2 or 0.20. It doesn't matter in your work if you put 0.20 and I kept it there just to prove the point. My math, when I'm doing my work, it doesn't have to be an actual number. I can have my 0.20 to remind me that I moved it 2 times. I'm okay with that. If it was an answer, I'd have to have 0.2 because that's a true number and 0.20 is not. I'm showing my work, so I'm good with this if you want to leave the 0. That way you're not confused. But once I've made it into my decimal, once I've shown my work, then all I have to do is type it into my handy dandy calculator and I find out that it's 16.2 or 20% of 80 is indeed 16. My answer compared to my percentage and whole number, smaller percentage, smaller answer, it's a logical answer. 95% has to be changed to a decimal. Same process, drop my percent sign, move my decimal from right to left 2 times, and I get 0.95. I'm going to have 340 times 95 hundredths, or 0.95. Then I can type in my handy dandy calculator, 340 times 0.95, and I'm going to get 323. It's a smaller answer, and less than 100%. It's a logical answer. So 323 is my correct answer. I keep saying that because on this one, it's different. I'm going to change my 200% into a decimal. I still drop my percent and I move my decimal from right to left 2 times, but I have a whole number now. And if my whole number is 1, my answer should be equal. If it's more than 1, then I know my answer is going to be greater. So we saw that the percentages were smaller than 100%. My answers ended up being smaller. But when I do my logical check to see if my answer is logical, this should be greater than 8.5. My 2, I can leave it as 2.0 if you want to. You don't have to. It's just multiplying by 2. So if I take 8.5 or 8 5/10 times 2, I get 17. That answer is logical than my original number, or is greater than my original number. So that is my logical answer. So now I want you to do the next 2 on your own and see how you do it. Make sure you're understanding because we're getting ready to flip the concept and go on to part 2 of this assignment. So find 2 answers, 5 and 6, and then check your work. So hopefully you've done as I've asked. So you have 2 answers and you have 2 sets of work shown on your paper. So we'll go to 5. The first one is to change it into a decimal. I drop my percent sign and move my decimal from right to left 2 times, and you had 1.25. Now, if you put 1.25 on top or if you put 1.25 on bottom of your multiplication problem, I don't care because I can multiply or I can add in either order and I'm still going to get the same answer. So Some of you get a little freaked out when your larger, more digits is on bottom. Just to prove you it still works, I just put it on bottom. I'm still going to get my same answer. If I have 1.25 and I multiply it by 70, type it in my handy dandy calculator, you should have gotten 87.5. That answer is larger than my original number. This is more than 100%, so I know it's logical, and that is the correct answer. Now on 6, it was a little tricky because we didn't have any like those, but hopefully you didn't really struggle and you just followed the steps in which I just reviewed with you and I taught you 24 weeks ago. You dropped your percent sign, you moved your decimal from right to left 2 times, and you had to add an extra 0 there. So you ended up with 0.0025 that you're using. I still do the same type of math. I set it up as my multiplication problem. I have 120 times 0.0025, 25 10,000s, and I just type it into my handy dandy calculator. And I get 0.3. Now you could have gotten 0.30 if you did it by hand, but you would have to drop that 0 off at the end and just have 0.3, 3/10 as your final answer. So this shouldn't be difficult. It's just more steps than what we've done in a couple of the past lessons. Now we're going to switch what we're doing. We're going to go from the word of and we're going to look at the word is. And is means an equal sign. That's important to understand. This is a key idea, a key term to do the second half of our assignment, which is the back page. If I know that my is my equal sign, then I have to be able to do some things in reverse of what I just did on the first half. What I mean is what we've done on the first half is we had things like 6 is equal to 2 of 3 or 3 of 2. And all I was doing was multiplying. Well, my fact families, which we talked about in the first week of school and we have continued to talk about for 36 weeks, tells me that I could then take my answer and divide by one of these to get the other one. Fact families are 3 numbers that are interrelated, where I end up with 2 multiplication and 2 division, or I have my 2 addition, 2 subtraction, fact families. So I would be set up as 3 is what of 6 and 2. So 3 is, that's my equal sign. 3 is indeed equal to 6 divided by 2. 2 is indeed equal to 6 divided by 3. So when I see all of these problems, I know I'm going to have to write out what I see, and then I'm going to have to change my problem. I got to do some reversing so I can do the correct math. When I look at it, the first thing I have is percentage, 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 so on and so forth, 6 different times, and I can't use them. I have to change my percentages into decimals again because it is going to be easier on you, especially with these instead of doing fractions. I do the same process. I drop my percent sign, I move my decimals from right to left 2 times, and I end up with 0.25. Then I start out by writing out what I'm given. I'm told that 4 is equal to 2 or 0.25, 2500ths, times something. Of is my multiplication. I don't know what my, so I just put it in there for my missing number. And if that's the case, then I got to do some reversal math. I got to, instead of multiply, divide. And I'm always going to divide what my answer is, because that's what the is tells me. It's equal to this. And I'm going to divide it by the number that I'm given. So my math I'm actually going to do is 4 divided by 0.25. This is what we have to end up with in order to type it into our calculators correctly. I have to see on your problems how you change your percent into a decimal. I have to see the math problem that we're setting up. Now here's where some of you are going to say, oh, there's one step I don't have to show, and so I'm not going to show it because it would take a half a second longer. If you skip this step, you are likely to end up doing this one incorrectly. But I do not require this step. I require this and this. Take it for what it is, but I will always show that step when I'm doing it by hand or I fill it out on the computer because I know what I'm doing when I go from here to here. With that in mind, then if I take 4 divided by 0.25 and I type that in my calculator, just like I say it, 4 divided by, first number first, the 0.25, then I get 60. You don't have to show a division box. You don't have to show all the long division steps if you don't want to. You have to show me this math problem in order to get your point and how you converted your decimal or your percent into a decimal. All right, question 2. We're going to go from 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3. We have 1 point is 10% of something. So I'm going to write out once again what that tells me. I know I jumped ahead. I have to change my percent into a decimal first. Drop my percent sign, move my decimal from right to left 2 times, I end up with 0.1. Then I can get into my math. So the first thing, I'm then going to write down what it tells me. It tells me that 1 is, so that's my equal sign, 0.1 of multiplication, a missing number. When I have that, then my fact families tells me I have to do some reversal. I have to set it up as a division problem. So I'm going to know that I have my answer divided by something, and the only thing I have to divide it by is my 0.1. That then has to be equal to my missing number. Then I can type it into my calculator. 1 divided by 0.1 equals, and I find out my answer is 10. So if I wanted to check my work, because I had a couple of you ask me a couple weeks ago, well, how would I check that? I plug my 10 in for my n. That's my substitution method. And if I typed in 0.1 times 10, I would find out my answer is indeed 1. All right, so row 2, the second quarter for the Lions here. We have 8 points is 40% of, and I can't use my percent. So I have to start out by changing my percent into a decimal. Drop my percent sign, move my decimal from right to left 2 times. I know I have 0.4. So I'm going to write down what it tells me. 8 is, so 8 equals 0.4 now, instead of 40%, because I can't use the percent, of this multiplication and my missing number. My fact families tells me I've got to do some reversal math here. I got to change it from multiplication to division, and it's always going to be the answer that it is divided by the number that's given. So I'm going to have 8 divided by 0.4 or 4/10. Then I can type it into my handy dandy calculator. 8 divided by 0.4 equals, and I see that it is equal to 20. Once again, if I wanted to do a quick check just to make sure my answer is logical, then I would substitute my 20 in for my n, and I would take 20 times 0.4, and I would indeed find out that that is 8. All right, so now on the Bears side, we have 5 points is 20% of something. Can't use my percent. Got to change it into a decimal, drop my percent sign, move my decimal from right to left 2 times. Easy way to make sure that I'm getting points. And then I am going to show my math problem that I end up solving by typing into my calculator. First, I write what it is that it's telling me. It's telling me that 5 is, that's my equal sign, 20%, which we found out was actually 0.2. You could use 0.20 if you wanted to, if it was better for you to remember. Of, which is multiplication, a missing number. Now I have to do my fact families. I know that I can't multiply to find my answer, so I got to reverse it and change it into division. So I'm going to take my answer that I know it has to be equal to, divide it by the number that's there. So 5 divided by 2/10. Type it into my handy dandy calculator. Tells me that the answer for n is 25. Third quarter, I have 15 points is 50% of. Can't use my 50% in a math problem. I'm going to change it by dropping my percent sign, moving my decimal from right to left 2 times, which gives me 0.5. If you want to keep it as 0.50, will not change your math answer, so that is fine. I write down what it is that it's telling me. It tells me that 15 is my equal sign, 0.5, because that's what 50% is equal to as a decimal, of multiplication, and then I have a missing number. My fact families tells me I can't multiply to get my n, so I'm going to reverse it into division. I take what the answer is that they tell me, and I'm going to divide it by the number that's given. So 15 divided by 0.5. Once again, has to have that in order to get points for showing work. Then I can type it into my handy dandy calculator. 15 divided by 0.5 equals, and I find out that the answer is 30. So I want you to do the last one on your own. Check your work and see how you did. So hopefully you've done as I've asked. You've ended up with a final answer, and we can now check it. So 45% has to be changed into 0.45. You showed that by dropping your percent sign and moved your decimal 2 times to get your 0.45. Easy way to show work. Then, if you wanted to, once again, you don't have to, but I advise you to so you don't mess up your next step. I write down that 9 is equal to, because that's what is, 0.45 times, because that tells me of, and my missing number. And I know my fact families tell me I have to reverse that because I can't do it by multiplication. So I'm going to take my 9 divided by 0.45. So if you have these two things, you got a point for showing your work. When you type it into your handy dandy calculator, 9 divided by 0.45 equals, then you would find out that the answer is 20. So hopefully you got a second point for the correct answer. This is not a difficult math lesson. It's just remembering all those key things. Number one, I can't use a percent in a math problem. I have to change my percent into fractions or decimals, and I ask you to trust me to understand that I understand math and that decimals is easier on these math problems. Number two, that of means multiplication. And number three, the word is means my equal sign. So if I show all my steps and my processes to get to it, showing my work by changing my percentage and the math problem, then I get a point. Showing my answer and making sure it's a logical answer gets me my second point. It is about a 20-minute video, only because we're reviewing two major types of problems. You have a front side, which is the of side, and we have a back side, which is the is side. 20 questions the rest of class to get it done. Come and ask if you've watched my video like I've asked and followed along, and you still are struggling to understand.